As you say, the main thrust of today, an ultimatum was delivered, and the government here turned round and said no, not withdrawing that bill. In the last hour, we've had a statement from Michel Barnier, and he said a few words as he came out of the talks about how trust was central, and then he issued a very interesting list, effectively, in his statement of all the areas where there's still no agreement between the EU and Britain. And you sense he's kind of saying, if this is a scam, if you are actually just trying to leverage us and do a deal at the last minute, boy, are we apart on a lot of areas. And at the end of this list, he even mentions the idea that the EU's not entirely happy, comfortable yet with our phytosanitary regime. What that means is they're not entirely sure they'd take food imports from Britain after Britain leaves the EU at the end of December. It's an extraordinary list, and at the same time we got hold of a document that was sent by the European Union to EU ambassadors today, and this is showing how the whole EU machinery of warfare is being geared up, ready to take on Britain if the EU believes that Britain has defied that divorce agreement. And it's saying that they're ready to do that pretty much immediately. Now you sense the EU gear up the machinery, but also wait and see exactly what Britain does. And in the first instance, indication we've had of that is the timetable for that controversial bill. The government intends to rush it through the House of Commons next week. There are signs that it'll win the first vote there, but you can't be sure. The numbers aren't there yet for a rebellion. You can't be utterly sure that there won't be key amendments that they could lose. Wouldn't bank on it just yet, though, but they just could. A lot of people tonight are not ruling out the idea that there could be a Boris Johnson U-turn. We've seen enough of those, but right now the odds amongst a lot of people who follow this story very closely, they're lowering the odds very much on the idea that there could be a deal.
The EU Vice President rushing to London for an emergency meeting to ask Britain what on earth it's playing at. The EU Chief Brexit Negotiator already zipped over to ask the same question.
I'm going to raise the serious concerns the European Union has about the bill which was proposed.
After his meeting with Michael Gove, Maros Sefcovic called on the UK to withdraw these measures by the end of the month. And he warned that the EU had a number of mechanisms and legal remedies it could use to punish Britain, which the European Union will not be shy in using. That ultimatum from the EU seemed to get a defiant no from Michael Gove.
I made it perfectly clear to Vice President Šefčovič that we would not be withdrawing this legislation. And he understood that. Of course, he regretted it. But we also stressed the vital importance of making progress.
Important, but now much harder. Michel Barnier spent the afternoon in talks with the UK's chief negotiator, Lord Frost. While he was in those talks, the British government published its legal argument for defying convention and breaking an international agreement, saying Parliament is sovereign as a matter of domestic law and can pass legislation which is in breach of the UK's treaty obligations. EU officials leaving to get the Eurostar home. EU sources said the EU could take Britain to the European Court, which could impose a heavy fine. The pain could go beyond that.
The real torture weapon isn't actually anything in the Court of Justice, which I don't think will scare Boris Johnson too much. The real weapon of torture is the lack of a trade agreement, the economic impact on Britain, the psychological impact on the British economy of there being no agreement, the impact on financial markets, which will react very negatively, the impact on the psychology of British business, knowing that they're being cut off from their largest trading market, or partly cut off, the huge prospect of chaos at the borders, friction at the borders, lack of access to the EU's single market in any respect, lack of ability to travel easily from one part of Europe to another. These are the things that the EU is hoping will make British ministers change their mind and say to Boris Johnson, hang on a minute, we just don't want to go down this way.
The EU believes the clauses Britain wants to rewrite were the ones that allowed everyone to rule out border checks on goods between Northern Ireland and Ireland. One who negotiated the Good Friday Agreement worries Britain's actions could pile pressure to put back a hard border. But do you worry some people in number 10 are almost daring you to put it there?
No, I think so. I think there is a bit of that, and you could come to the stage of saying, well, if we put that up to them, then they're going to have to start looking at that solution.
Boris Johnson's been saying what he's doing with this bill is defending the Good Friday Agreement. Is that how you see it?
No, and I don't think he sees it that way either. If Boris wants to convince me of that, just let him announce that he's withdrawn those sections from it.
And if he doesn't withdraw them?
If he doesn't withdraw that, we are damaging everything that we've achieved, and that would be a very unwise thing for him to do.
Views like that rippling across the Atlantic now. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, saying if Boris Johnson doesn't back down, he can forget any idea of the US Congress passing his longed-for US-UK trade agreement.
This news comes to us practically in the middle of the night, over the weekend, Monday. Later in the day, there, early in the morning here, that the UK had decided to undermine the Good Friday Accords. What were they thinking? Whatever it is, I hope they're not thinking of a UK-US bilateral trade agreement to make up for what they might lose.
Emerging from the talks in the last few minutes, Michel Barnier had this to say.
Just one word. Trust and confidence are and will be key.
Key and draining away. In a statement, Michel Barnier added a whole range of areas beyond fisheries and state subsidies where the EU still feels Britain has not, in their eyes, produced guarantees the EU needs to sign a free trade agreement.
Gary Given reporting. Well, no one from the government was available to talk to us, but joining me now is MEP Chris Peters, former Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, who now sits on the UK Coordination Group, a group that monitors the ongoing talks between the UK and European Union. Thanks for coming on the programme, Chris Peters. So the government has said it will not withdraw this bill. The EU still insists that aspects of the bill that it finds trampling on international law should go. There's now a standoff between the two, with ultimatums being threatened by both sides. Where do we go from here?
That's a very good question, and I'm a little bit worried. And I hope that we can reach an agreement, because it's very important not only for European Union but also for UK. So I hope that everyone is staying calm and find the right solutions. And I have two things to underline, and I shall say it in Latin. First of all, the anima societatis. That means the two parties must be convinced that an agreement is a win-win situation for everyone. The second Latin quote is pacta sunt servanda. When you sign an agreement, then you must be aware that this agreement is very important, and you cannot change that agreement when the other party is not okay with that. And these two elements, these two very important messages, we want to have an agreement.
Right.
In fact,
okay, but okay. I'm not sure, Chris Peters, if Latin will do the trick at the moment. The tempers seem to have gone, through the ceiling. Was it right for the European Union to threaten the British government with legal action at this delicate stage? Couldn't this have been resolved with talks behind closed doors? Hello, Chris Peters? I think, okay, we've lost you, Chris Peters, sadly. Okay. Well, we have seen the anger generated over the Atlantic on the other side of the pond, which could affect any future UK-US trade deal. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle, who sits on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the principal source of legislation relating to issues that include international trade agreements. Thanks for coming on the programme. What do you make of all this, this standoff going on between the British government and the European Union?
Well, from our perspective in the United States, it's extremely surprising and disappointing. We thought this issue had been resolved in December when the UK signed up to the withdrawal agreement, negotiated it, adopted it in your parliament. So the fact that just 9 months later, we are now back in this position is absolutely shocking.
And do you agree with Speaker Pelosi that if this somehow affects the Good Friday Agreement, you, the Democrats, will not sign off on any future trade deal with the UK?
No, it's not just Democrats, to correct you, but I accompanied Speaker Pelosi, as well as about 10 of my colleagues from the House Ways and Means Committee, to London, Dublin, and Belfast about a year and a half ago. We sat down with, we were right there at 10 Downing Street, met with the Chancellor at the time, Philip Hammond, and made clear that the United States is a guarantor of the Good Friday Accords. We negotiated it. It is an important, yes, it's a great achievement of the Irish government, British government, the local parties, but also of the United States as well, that we felt very strongly about making sure that in the Brexit process, UK did nothing to violate the Good Friday Accord. So if that does happen, which would be truly tragic, there will be no US-UK free trade agreement, period.
Right, okay, but there is nothing in this bill that explicitly violates the Good Friday Agreement. In fact, the government is saying it has put these provisions into the bill precisely because it wants to defend the Good Friday Agreement.
I give them credit for saying that with a straight face. That is a real achievement. Absolutely no one believes that. That is sheer nonsense. You know, the issue at stake here goes beyond taxes and tariffs. It is preserving a fairly fragile peace which has held for the last 2 decades. I don't know why in the world anyone in their right mind would want to bring back this issue. It is truly staggering.
But if you talk to people in Northern Ireland, it is quite difficult to find people there, the people who actually live there, who think that whatever happens with this trade deal, that hostilities could be resumed. I mean, they just think that that is very, very outlandish and unlikely to happen.
Really? I would be struck to exactly who you're speaking to in Northern Ireland, a place, by the way, today that has more quote-unquote peace walls than it did 2 decades ago. Actually, most people I speak to on both sides of the divide there are quite concerned about anything that would happen that would be destabilizing to the current status quo.
And just explain to us how you think that this latest bill can actually destabilize the Good Friday Agreement.
If you end up in a situation in which there need to be checks on the border between a member state of the European Union, which the Republic of Ireland is, and the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, would now be leaving or have left the EU. If you need to create checks there and a certain infrastructure to support that, that can have a destabilizing effect. We saw it before in the middle part of the 20th century when those border checks were erected in the first place.
And just one more, Congressman, is there a possibility that because Boris Johnson is, pretty close to Donald Trump, that this is tribal domestic American politics bleeding into a relationship between Washington and London?
No, and that's an important point. When you said before it was just Democrats who have this view, that's actually not the case. The Friends of Ireland caucus is bipartisan. There were many Republican members of Congress who were involved in the negotiation of the Good Friday Agreement, Republican members of Congress who are still involved today. So for here in the U.S., this actually isn't a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan one.
Okay, Brendan Ball, thank you very much indeed.